Hello, everyone. I'm Keenen Brinson, and welcome to my dinner table. Yes, we're at my dinner table. Why, you ask? Well, I believe that the foundation of the Black church begins in settings just like this, right? Remember where we would all sit down with our family, multiple generations sitting at one table talking about their day, talking about what they've been through, sharing their experiences of the past, and also talking about what we hope and dream for in the future. Coming out of a year where we've experienced extreme social distance, where we've experienced extreme distance from one another, how can we bring that all back together? Well, I believe we start right here at the table. So join me as we go and dig deeper into these conversations. The conversations of how to bridge those generational gaps in the Black church. What you will be experiencing today with me is a number of different interviews that cover the generations, starting with the baby boomers and all the way down to Generation Z. I invite you to come and sit with us. But in order for you to sit at this table, there's 4 components that you must know and understand. These components are none other than vulnerability, respect, humility, and humbleness. So if you embody those 4 things, if you're willing to let yourself go and sit down at the table and talk with us today, then come on, let's have the conversation. In way of beginning our discussion here, the very first thing that we're going to tackle is, what is the bedrock of the tension that we see between generations in the Black church?
The tension comes when you don't have a group of people that have the dynamics to simply communicate. All of my life, I've said, and I've heard it said, communication is key. But what I've discovered in my last year or so, learning through COVID and then this shutdown and stuff, is not just the ability to communicate, but it is the ability to communicate and comprehend. It means absolutely nothing for me to be talking if the person receiving is not comprehending what it is I'm trying to convey. I submit. So the tension has to do with our inability to communicate, comprehend, understand, and then literally for your generation or the younger generation to simply appreciate what it is that we bring to the table. Sometime I think the new generation has stepped into this know-it-all concept, or they feel like they know more than us, which segues literally into some other questions.
I think one of the bedrocks of the tension, number one, is to acknowledge that there is a level of tension between the generation prior and the generation currently. And that tension really is the effortless task that we take to cohabit and coexist in the same space. Oftentimes, we don't realize that we can actually coexist and still grow together. And I think the former generation has to understand that just because you're going doesn't mean you're growing. Like just because you've been here longer or you've done more with the church or the building on the manifestation of what we currently have doesn't mean that there has been continual growth. And in order to be fully successful and fully fruitful and frugal in the next season, that is to understand that the younger generation, we are stepping on the shoulders, but we're also walking in a different direction. We haven't changed our God, but we've only changed our method of how people reach our God. And so to minimize that tension, I think one, we need to acknowledge, and then 2, I think we need to advance in our efforts to continue to grow. That has to be intentional. I think it takes a measure of intentionality with a measure of acknowledgement.
The tension exists because there is not a concentrated, concerted, concentric, collaborative effort toward what I call baton passing and preparation. So you've got a generation who is moving so swiftly toward goals and objectives that they've created that they disconnect from the previous generation. We see that in business, we see it in ministry, we see it in family. There's got to be this intentionality about relationships, preparation, next level, next move. There's got to be an intentionality. So wherever there's not an intentionality, what replaces intentionality is tension. Because one group is expecting something, another group is asking for something, and neither group is meeting in the middle at the table.
Let's push this conversation just a little bit forward. When the older generation say, young people don't know enough, what exactly are they trying to say or convey with that statement?
It's a scathing indictment of the speaker. When you are a generation that raised the generation and your evaluation and analysis, your assessment can be, they don't know enough, that's your fault. That's That's your responsibility. Because at any moment that I realize Keenen doesn't know something, it's my responsibility to say, Keenen, let's meet every week. Let's meet via Zoom. Let's have a conversation. Keenen, this is the integral embryonic stage of pastoral ministry. Keenen, when it comes to assessing a church and evaluating it, here's how we meet with the board. Here's how we meet with the people. Keenen, avoid these things. Here's why you should avoid them. Here's been my contextual experience. Here's been my experience as a church consultant. Here's been my experience as a pastor to pastors, right? I need to be pouring all of this in. This is going to be a bad phrase, but let me use it in the context of where I'm at. We've got to literally do a data dump with each generation.
Knowledge and experience are not mutually exclusive. They don't have to avoid one another. I think we are at our best when we merge, just like we talked about history and tradition, when we merge knowledge and experience, right? So while I understand how Bitcoin works, because of my knowledge, I understand how a cryptocurrency, whatever, all that works. The experience from my granddaddies and from my daddy and my mama is I need to no man nothing but to love them, right? The scripture. I need to be on top of that. So if I save up enough money and I make cash purchases, I have enough money to invest. But that's experience meeting knowledge.
This question here is for my fellow young leaders. Are we able to advance the church without the voice and the knowledge of our older generations?
Have to respect the voices of our sages and our living legends and those ancestors that have gone on because they guide us. But that voice also must empower us to give us our voices of our own and to cause us to have visions of our own. I'm reminded of the text while Matthew was talking. I'm reminded of the text.
Say the text, Rev. Say the text.
where Jesus is being baptized by John.
Yeah.
In the midst of Jesus being baptized by John, God is present through the dove.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is humble enough, although Jesus already is kind of aware, we can assume that Jesus in some sense is aware of who he really is, that he is the embodiment of God in flesh. Jesus is humble enough. God is humble enough. The Spirit of God in Jesus is humble enough to allow for John to lead him. And then God says, this is my son, who I am well pleased. Proclamation that God gives. But the proclamation comes to Jesus being humble enough to receive the blessing from John. Good. And vision comes through a process of being willing to be humble, to hear the voice of someone who may have your destiny to lead your way.
How can we as young leaders and young people of the church gain the respect of our elders?
That's something that young people, young adults, young ministers are so programmed to do that we spend so much time trying to gain the respect that we never get respect. So in order to efficiently answer that question, it is to understand the principle of life. In order to get respect, you got to give respect. You know, I don't seem to fully and fluently understand how we can teach everything else in the Bible and how to honor every other position, but we never take heed to honoring the cupbearer.
My God.
We're so interested in taking the position of the king, we never embrace the position of the cupbearer. And those of us who are cupbearers of the gospel, because some of the churches believe that we have to be pioneers of the gospel, and that exists in us having a certain age. But the truth is, you can be a pioneer absent of a particular age group. So what I want to say is, who may listen to this or embrace this, is that I'm not interested in fighting for anybody's respect. And that doesn't mean I'm a buck against the system, but understand that the church is an institution and organization like any other organization. And it is, in order to fully make the church an ecclesia and living organism, in order to keep it at that pace, honor doesn't work from, the upward down. Honor works for the bottom up.
Yeah.
We have to give and get honor. This is God's church. Don't no man own no church. And so your respect for me is only a reflection of your respect for God. The next generation will believe who he says he is based upon how we treat each other.
I don't think you can have a viable church without a generation. You can't skip a generation and say, oh, church is going to work. You can't have a Joshua without a Moses. Huh? Don't nobody want to say amen. You can't have an Elisha without an Elijah.
Yeah.
You can't. Now you can say I was called from the womb as a prophet and I was gifted and all of this wonderful good stuff. And that's absolutely true.
But you can have it, but with no effect. You can have it, but with no effect.
At that point, if you're having it with no effect, are you even really having it?
Having it, yeah.
So God didn't do anything in the earth. God did nothing in the earth lest he did it through a man. Jesus Christ was Jesus Christ. If we were going to put it in time, we would say from the beginning of time, he was always him. But there was no time wrapped up in. So he's always been, he always was. He submitted himself to the baptism of John because it was the respect of the culture around him, and he needed that affirmation.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? He needed that affirmation, and that affirmation set him in place to do his ministry, right? We've got a group of people and young people that are saying there's a twofold argument. I did a panel on this with a bunch of older leaders and a bunch of younger leaders. I did a panel on this, and it's a twofold thing. A lot of the older generation they don't want to release the mantle. They don't want to release the mantle, and a lot of the younger generation, they're not waiting for the release of the mantle. Right?
Bro, so, you about to push me into a whole nother conversation.
What I'm saying,
right.
Imagine that. It's supposed to be here, and you release and you receive, right? It's here. So the mantle's falling, right? There's nobody there because they've already gone. So you're getting God, Lord, I don't want to go. You're getting apostles and you're getting prophets who are extremely gifted, but they don't have the oil or the residue of the generation before them.
Now for the question that I've been personally waiting for. Does holding on to traditions equal complacency?
Traditions are altruistic. They're all good, right? Traditions help us. They help form us. They help shape us. Traditions were not supposed to be discarded. They were supposed to be built upon.
Story is, and true story, I used to live on a road called Campbell Hill. Campbell Hill, before they paved it, was a clay dirt road. Whenever it rained, the first car that came down that road cut the rut. Every car that came behind it went in the same rut. The problem became when someone didn't want to get stuck in the rut, would try to cut a new rut. And it was very difficult to cut a new rut. Very difficult. Most folk would go in the first rut that was cut. It was hard to get out of the rut. Not that you couldn't do it, but it took effort and consistency to get out of the rut.
Thank you for joining me here at the table. And I pray that these questions and this discussion has informed you just as it has informed me. I believe that conversations just like this is exactly what's going to take us to the next level in God. Now, how does this relate to Sankofa, you ask? Well, Sankofa is the image of that bird that sits with an egg in its mouth, but its head turned backwards. All while the head is turned backwards, its feet is still moving forward. How does that relate to this project, you ask me? Well, I'm glad you asked. I believe that today in the church, that egg is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And their head turned backwards is the wisdom and knowledge that we gain from our ancestors and our previous generations. And our feet moving forward is the willingness and the strength that we have to keep on going. So I pray that this project blesses not only your life, but your ministry, and that we begin to mend these generational gaps. Thank you.